Have you ever felt like something is missing, even when you're surrounded by people? What if the place you're running from is exactly where you need to be to find yourself? Michael thought happiness was far from home until he lost everything. But what happened when he returned was something no one expected. This is a story of failure, redemption, and an embrace that changed everything. And if I told you this could happen to you too? The wind swayed the wheat fields under the sky painted gold, but Michael barely noticed the beauty around him. He leaned against the old wooden fence of the farm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was as if that sunset held a secret he hadn't yet discovered. With each breeze that passed, Michael felt the invisible weight that kept him there. It wasn't sadness. It was something more subtle, like his heart was somewhere else, calling him far away. "Michael!" Liam's firm voice echoed behind him. Daydreaming again? Michael slowly turned. Liam, his older brother, stood with his sleeves rolled up and sweat on his forehead from working in the field. He held a hammer, pointing to the fallen stakes near the barn. "I need help here before it gets dark." "I'm coming," Michael replied, but stayed put. He wanted to say that fixing fences wasn't in his life plans, that he wanted to fix something bigger, maybe his own restless soul. Liam squinted but didn't insist. He knew that when Michael got like this, nothing could snap him out of it. That night, the silence at the dinner table felt heavier than usual. The clinking of the spoon against the plate, the sound of the knife cutting bread. Everything echoed louder than it should have. Michael glanced sideways at his father, who ate calmly, unaware of the storm growing inside him. Finally, Michael put down his fork and cleared his throat. "Dad, I need to talk to you." His father slowly raised his eyes. There was a calm glow in them, but somehow they also seemed to see through everything. "I'm listening, son." "I've been thinking." Michael took a deep breath, his heart beating fast. "I want to leave. I need to see the world." His mother stopped cutting the bread. Liam frowned but said nothing. "I want my share of the inheritance," Michael continued, lowering his voice at the last part. Time seemed to stop. Liam dropped his spoon, staring at his brother as if he hadn't heard correctly. The father simply watched Michael, not breaking eye contact. "You have everything you need here, son," his father finally said, his voice calm. "I know, but..." Michael lowered his head. "There's something inside me. I feel like I need to find out for myself." Liam let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "You must be joking. Dad, you're not really going to do this." His father remained silent for a moment, then shifted his gaze to the window, where the sky was now a dark blue. "If that's what Michael wants," he said softly, "I won't stop him." Liam stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Dad!" "Liam!" His father raised his hand, asking for calm. Sometimes the only way to learn is by walking your own path. Michael couldn't face his brother. Liam looked at him with the mix of anger and concern that only an older brother could have. That night felt long. Michael stared at the ceiling of his room, his mind full of plans and doubts. The sound of the wind outside seemed to call him, but deep down, there was a tightness in his chest he couldn't ignore. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but the desire for something greater, something he couldn't name, spoke louder than fear. The sun hadn't yet risen when Michael left home. The backpack slung over his shoulder felt heavier than it should. Inside, a debit card linked to the account his father had just transferred into his name. He left quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. But as he crossed the field, he had the strange feeling that his father was awake, perhaps sitting on the porch, watching the darkness and silently accepting his son's decision. Michael didn't look back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew that if he did, he might hesitate. The road to the city felt endless. Dust rose with each step, and the heat of the day made his skin burn. But Michael felt something he hadn't in a long time: freedom. When he finally saw the first buildings in the distance, his heart sped up. The city opened before him like a new world, bright and full of promises. The streets were alive, filled with voices, laughter, and sounds Michael had never heard. Carts hurried by, vendors called out their goods, and children ran between the alleys. It was a vibrant chaos, and Michael let himself get swept up in it. Here, no one knew him. In the first few days, everything seemed easy. He rented a simple room in a hotel near the market. He bought new clothes, outfits that made him feel like someone important, different from the farm boy he used to be. Michael spent without hesitation. He ate at the best places, met new people every night. "Where are you from?" they asked. "From a farm far away." And he always said it with a certain pride, as if he had left behind an ordinary life for something greater. The inheritance seemed endless. He made a point to buy drinks for everyone at the bars, gifts for strangers who made him laugh, and always sat at the most expensive tables. Life finally had flavor, but like a wave that slowly recedes, the money began to disappear. Michael didn't notice at first. It was just one more purchase, just one more night out, until one day, while paying the hotel owner, he noticed his card wasn't going through as smoothly as before. "It's just a glitch," he told himself. "There's enough." But there wasn't. Gradually, dinners turned into cheap fast food. Friends started declining invitations or simply vanished. Michael tried to hold onto what little was left, but the city that once felt welcoming now seemed indifferent. When he could no longer pay for the hotel, he left quietly. He wandered the streets until his feet led him to the fields outside the city. That's where he met a farmer who needed help. "The work's tough, kid," said the man, "but it's what I've got. You can take care of the pigs." Michael nodded, out of options. And so the new job began. The smell of the pig pen clung to him, and the clothes that once made him feel important were now dirty with mud and sweat. One morning, while pouring slop for the pigs, his stomach growled. The smell of the pig's food seemed more appealing than it should have. That's when reality hit him hard. "Even the workers at my father's farm have more than I do now." Michael leaned against the fence and stared at the horizon. For the first time, the horizon didn't feel like a promise, but a longing that grew inside him. He closed his eyes. It was time to go home. The heat inside the barn was suffocating, but Michael barely felt it. He leaned against the wooden fence, watching the pigs eat the slop he had just poured. The strong smell didn't bother him anymore. Michael had lost track of how many days he'd been there. The work was simple: feed the animals, clean the pig pen, carry buckets of water. The routine was repetitive, but better than starving. At first, he thought it would be temporary. A month, maybe two. But time passed slowly, and the money never returned. The city had taken everything. Michael never imagined he'd end up there, but he couldn't blame anyone but himself. It was his choice. "Hey, kid," the farmer called from across the field. "Those buckets aren't full yet." Michael gave a half-hearted wave and kept working. There was no rush anymore. That night, after another long day, Michael sat by the pig pen. The stars shimmered in the dark sky, and he gazed up at them as if waiting for an answer. His stomach growled, but he was used to it by now. Sometimes he thought about grabbing a handful of the pig's food. At least it would stop the hunger for a while. Michael let out a humorless laugh. "Look at you," he muttered to himself. He leaned back against the fence and closed his eyes. Images of his father's farm filled his mind. The warm bread fresh out of the oven, his mother's voice calling from the kitchen, the sound of his father's laugh during dinner. The longing was sharp, but with it came shame. "Even the workers at my father's farm have more than I do." Michael opened his eyes, feeling his chest tighten. "I don't belong here." The words hung in the silence. For the first time since leaving, Michael thought about going back. But doubt followed him like a shadow. Would his father take him back? Michael was up before the sun rose. The decision had woken him in the middle of the night, like someone had whispered it in his ear. He couldn't explain what had changed. Maybe the hunger, maybe the longing, but something inside him wouldn't let him stay there another day. He pushed open the wooden fence with a creak and slowly walked toward the farmer's office. "I'm leaving today." His voice was firm but soft. The farmer looked him up and down, as if waiting for Michael to change his mind. "You sure, kid?" he asked. "If you leave now, I can't promise you'll find another place to stay." Michael nodded. "I know," and he really did. He knew the road back wouldn't be easy. He knew Liam's gaze would be harsh, and his father's words, well, he wasn't sure if his father even wanted him back. But none of that mattered now. Michael just wanted to go home. The road felt longer this time, or maybe Michael was just more tired. With every step, doubt grew. He rehearsed what he'd say to his father. "Dad, I was wrong. I don't deserve to come back." But nothing sounded right. Shame followed him like a shadow. As he walked, he remembered one of the last conversations he had with his father before leaving. "Michael," his father had said, as they watched the sunset from the porch, "life is full of paths, but no matter how far you go, there's always a way back." At the time, Michael hadn't paid much attention. Now, those words felt like an anchor, keeping him moving forward. When the house finally appeared on the horizon, Michael's heart pounded. He stopped in the middle of the road, sweat dripping down his face. This was it. But before he could take another step, he saw a figure in the distance, running toward him. His father. Michael blinked, confused. His father was running quickly, his face marked by time, but with a smile Michael didn't expect to see. When they finally met, Michael opened his mouth to speak, but he was cut off by an embrace. A tight, long embrace without a word. Michael felt tears fall down his face but didn't try to hide them. "Dad, I don't deserve this," he managed to say, his voice trembling. His father pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "You came back, son." His voice was soft, full of compassion. "That's all that matters." Michael lowered his head, feeling like a child again. The shame was still there, but his father's love was greater. And for the first time in a long while, Michael felt at home. The farm looked different through Michael's eyes, even though nothing had really changed. It was him who had changed. As he walked alongside his father toward the house, Michael's steps were slow. The embrace had been comforting, but now, with each step closer to the door, the old shame crept back in. "Dad!" Michael broke the silence, staring at the ground. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I know I disappointed you." His father stopped and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, no one returns the same." He smiled gently. "But the important thing isn't how you came back. It's that you did." The words warmed Michael's heart, but not enough to erase his worry about Liam. When they reached the porch, Liam was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them from a distance. His face was unreadable, but the tightness in his jaw made it clear that he wasn't as eager as their father to welcome Michael home. Michael stepped onto the first stair and hesitated. "Liam," he began, but his brother raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not going to lie," Liam said flatly. "I don't know if I agree with this." Michael lowered his gaze. "I don't know if I deserve it either." Liam stared at him for a long moment, then glanced at their father. "And you're just going to forget what he did? Pretend he didn't take everything and leave like nothing else mattered?" Their father took a deep breath, crossing his arms calmly. "Your brother was lost, but now he's been found. He got lost because he chose to. And how many times have we made mistakes, Liam?" His father's voice was patient. "Grace isn't given to those who deserve it. If it were, it wouldn't be grace." Liam said nothing, his eyes drifting away from them, lips pressed tight. Michael felt the weight of the moment, but he knew he couldn't force it. "I just want to help," Michael said softly, "even if it's as one of the workers. I don't need to be treated the same as before." His father let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You're my son, Michael, and you always will be." Liam turned and walked back inside without another word. Michael stayed on the porch for a moment, breathing in the familiar air. It was strange how, despite the fear and the unspoken words, this still felt like home. His father gave him a gentle pat on the back. "Come on, dinner's ready." And as Michael stepped inside, he felt something stir within him. There was still a long road to rebuilding everything, but for the first time in a long while, he knew he wouldn't walk it alone. The house smelled the same as always, a mix of fresh bread, coffee, and something that reminded Michael of childhood. He stepped inside slowly, as if he still couldn't believe he was there. The table was set, and his father pulled out a chair for him. Sit down, son. Michael hesitated. I don't want to interrupt. Interrupt? His father chuckled softly. We're celebrating. Michael glanced across the table. Liam was there, but he didn't look up. He chewed slowly, not saying a word. The silence at the table was almost tangible, and Michael felt like any wrong word could make everything fall apart. How was the work on the farm? His father asked, trying to ease the tension. Michael forced a small smile. Messy. The pigs were the only ones happy to see me. This time, his father laughed genuinely. Liam didn't. The food tasted less flavorful than Michael remembered. Not because the taste had changed, but because guilt weighed down every bite. After dinner, Michael stood up to help his mother clear the table. Leave it, Michael, his father said. Come with me to the barn. I want to show you something. They walked under the starry sky in silence. His father carried a lantern that lit the path to the old barn. When they arrived, he pushed the large doors open with a creak and switched on the single light bulb hanging in the center. At the back of the barn, something large was covered by a canvas. What's that? Michael asked, curious. His father tugged at the canvas, revealing an old blue pickup truck. The paint was a little faded, but the headlights still shined. Does it still run? His father smiled. It does. It's been here since you left. I knew one day you'd come back, so I kept it for you. Michael stared at the truck, struggling to hold back his emotions. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. I just wanted you to know there's always been a place for you here. Michael took a deep breath, fighting back the tears. Dad, I don't deserve this. No one deserves everything, son. His father gently squeezed his shoulder. But love doesn't work that way. Michael lowered his head, feeling a lump form in his throat. Thank you. His father didn't respond. He just embraced him. A firm, long hug that said everything words couldn't. And in that moment, Michael realized the true miracle wasn't that he had come home. The real miracle was that he had been welcomed with open arms. The next morning, Michael woke up to the smell of coffee and bread coming from the kitchen. The sun poured in through the cracks in the window of his old room. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed, but something had. Michael went downstairs and found his father on the porch, gazing out at the fields. His hands were tucked into his pockets, rocking slightly as he often did when he was happy. Did you sleep well? His father asked without turning around. Better than I expected, Michael replied, leaning against the railing beside him. They stood in silence for a while, until his father turned to him with a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I'm thinking of having a special dinner tonight. Invite the neighbors and friends. I think everyone would like to know you're back. Michael's brow furrowed. Dad, I don't know if that's a good idea. His father tilted his head, curious. Why not? I don't know if I'm ready for that. Michael lowered his gaze. I'm not sure I deserve a celebration. His father laughed softly. It's not about deserving, son. It's about celebrating. Michael sighed but didn't argue. Deep down, the weight of guilt still lingered. Later, while helping his mother prepare dinner, Michael heard the sound of cars arriving. His father had, indeed, invited the neighbors and friends. One by one, the backyard filled with familiar faces. Laughter, conversation, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. At first, Michael felt out of place. But as the night went on, something began to shift. He noticed that many of the people there weren't looking at him with judgment but with warmth. It was as if no one cared about his past. Liam, however, stayed distant. Leaning against a tree, he watched the celebration from afar, arms crossed. Michael grabbed a glass of juice and walked over to him. Aren't you coming in? Liam shrugged. Someone's got to keep an eye on the barn. Michael chuckled. You know, I figured you'd react this way. Liam stared at him, serious. You think this is easy for me, Michael? You left, spent everything, and came back like nothing happened. And now there's a party for you. Michael nodded slowly. I get it, Liam. And you're right. I don't expect you to trust me again so quickly. Liam shifted his gaze toward the stars. Dad wouldn't do this for me, you know? I think he would. Michael leaned against the tree beside him. The difference is you never needed it. Liam stayed quiet for a while, processing those words. I didn't mean to disappoint him, Michael finally said. I know. They stood side by side, saying nothing more. And at that moment, Michael realized that true restoration wouldn't come from a party, but from small steps, one day at a time. The party stretched late into the night, but Michael stayed until the last guest had left. He helped his mother clear the tables while his father extinguished the lights around the yard. Liam had already gone upstairs, and the lingering quiet felt comforting. When everything was packed away, Michael walked to the porch and sat on the steps, gazing up at the star-filled sky. His father appeared shortly after, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. I thought you'd still be inside, his father said, handing Michael one of the cups. I needed some time to think. His father smiled. And what did you figure out? Michael stayed silent for a moment, blowing gently on the tea to cool it down. That coming back isn't easy. His father sipped from his cup, nodding thoughtfully. No, it isn't. Michael turned to him, his face serious. Dad, you didn't have to throw this party. I'm still trying to figure out who I am after all this. His father looked at him gently. Son, do you think the party was just for you? Michael frowned. Who else would it be for? His father set his cup down beside him and looked toward the stars. When you left, something inside me felt empty. Even with Liam and your mother here, part of me was always waiting. Incomplete. He paused, taking a deep breath. Tonight wasn't just about you coming home. It was about us as a family being whole again. Michael felt his chest tighten. His father's words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. I never thought of it that way. That's because you still think you have to carry everything on your own, his father said, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. But love doesn't work like that. When one of us hurts, we all hurt. And when one of us returns, we all rejoice. Michael looked out over the farm, his heart feeling lighter. Maybe he hadn't come back just to seek forgiveness. Maybe he had returned to rediscover the purpose he had left behind. I want to help around here again, Dad, Michael said firmly. However I can. His father smiled, squeezing his shoulder. You're already helping, son. Michael sat there a while longer, next to his father, without saying another word. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only home could offer. And that night, for the first time since he left, Michael slept in peace. And now I ask you, what's stopping you from returning to the place where you truly belong? Is it the fear of not being accepted? The shame of past mistakes? Or maybe you're still trying to find purpose in places it was never meant to be? Michael learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage is admitting we need to start over. And you? Are you ready to take that step? Share in the comments, what did this story stir within you? What decision can you make today to change the direction of your life? If you want to keep learning from stories like this that inspire and transform, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, you'll find stories that touch the heart and renew your faith. Let's walk this journey of purpose and transformation together.